pour cette soirée très intéressante qu'on va vivre ensemble. Les interventions se feront en anglais, donc si quelqu'un a besoin d'un écouteur pour les traductions vers le français, je vous prierai de bien vouloir aller en chercher un au fond de la salle. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Museum of Resistance and Human Rights in Esch. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you for this really interesting and important discussion we will have this evening. The museum changed its name 5 years ago from National Museum of Resistance to National Museum of Resistance and Human Rights. And considering the evolution we live in this world, that's too dark, yeah. Considering the evolution we live in this world, this was really an important, necessary step to do. Opening the history, linking the history, linking what happened during World War II with what's happening today in our societies, in the world, is a necessary and important step. As an educational institution, we do our best to reach students, to reach adults, to reach everyone who visits the museum. But we are not the only one to work to support human rights. And it's really important that ONGs, that volunteers do this job and continue fighting for the rights. Whether we are considered directly because we have origins in a country which is a dictatorship or where human rights are not respected, or whether we are Europeans living in a less or more secure world. As a Luxembourger, I never had to fight for my human rights. It's normal to have them in Luxembourg, but not for everyone. Even that I'm aware, we are aware in the museum that even in Luxembourg there are lots of people who have problems with the respect of their fundamental rights. So the message is clear, we have to fight, we have to continue. Every one of us, up to now we are secure, but we see that what we thought would be eternal, the respect of these rights may change. We see in the United States how within a year, a regime, and I call it regime, a government, changed democracy and moved towards dictatorship. There are still some steps to go, but I think that it's quite dangerous, and we hope that the situation will get better. I talk about the United States, but I know this evening we have people from other countries, from other continents, where this insecurity, where the dictatorship, where the respect of human rights is not given. It's not only our Western view that should import. So it's really important for all of us to be here. It's important to go out and to talk, to sensibilize, and to do our best to try not to get it worse. Thank you.
Welcome, and thank you for coming tonight. This roundtable is organized by a consortium of 4 NGOs: Amnesty International Luxembourg, Action Solidarity Tiers Monde, Comité pour une Paix Juste au Proche-Orient et les Amis du Tibet Luxembourg. We would like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for its financial support and its trust in our pilot project. We would like also to thank the Musée National de la Résistance et des Droits Humains, and especially Mr. Schroeder, for hosting us tonight. Thank you to Salomé Lannier, who accepted to moderate this roundtable tonight. Thank you to all the panelists, of course, and thank you to Mr. Luc Dockendorf, who accepted to make an introduction to this roundtable. I also would like to tell you, if you haven't, I don't know if you got the chance to visit the exhibition outside, just outside of the museum. This roundtable is also organized in link with that exhibition on the defenders. You can visit it later if you want. So, Mr. Luc Dockendorf, thank you.
Hi, good evening. The room is rather fuller than when I sat down in the front row, so that's good to see that you're all here tonight. So my name is Luc Dockendorf. I'm, well, as it says on the screen, the ambassador for cybersecurity, even higher, cybersecurity and digitalization. I will, if you allow me, speak a little more freely tonight, because if I speak as a representative of the government, it's very strict what I can say and can't say. But we're here to have a conversation that Salomé will moderate later, and that I'm very honoured to be on. So if that's okay, if anyone has a question about formal policy, you're very welcome to ask that as well, and I'll do my best to answer it in as formal a manner as possible. But I think the complexity of what we'll talk about tonight means that I do have to step a little bit off the beaten track. I hope that's everybody's comfortable with that. So I've been in international relations for a bit over 22 years, and working for the Foreign Ministry for almost 20. And I wanted to, well, thank, of course, the Musée de la Résistance and ASTM, CPGPO, Amnesty, and also the Amis du Tibet for organizing the talk tonight. I was, in the time that I was in diplomacy, I've been on the team of Luxembourg on the UN Security Council in 2013 and 14, and also Luxembourg's team on the Human Rights Council in 2022 to 24. And everywhere, human rights, of course, are central to what we do in diplomacy. I do have a bit of personal history as well with this particular place. My paternal grandfather was in one of the many Luxembourgish resistance groups, and he spent 2 years in Mauthausen concentration camp as an inmate. And after he came back, he made it his life's purpose to tell young people about the Second World War and concentration camps. And my father took that on from him, and at some point, I suppose I'll do the same, and my kids too. So we're in 2026, and we have 8 billion people on the planet, and the International Committee of the Red Cross is counting around 130 armed conflicts. I just have to set the timer, because when I talk about human rights, I forget the time, and we do have a lot to talk about tonight. And technology has an impact on every conflict around the planet. It makes some of them much worse, and sometimes it helps protect human rights, but more often than not it doesn't. And I'm sure we'll get the possibility to go into each after we have the discussion later. And I think in many ways the 20th century was informed by, it's the phone, what was called the military-industrial complex, that militaries and private industry work together to make war profitable. And in the 21st, we have something like a technology military-industrial complex, or also something that another philosopher called surveillance capitalism, where it's actually very profitable to put out technologies that can be used to restrict people's freedoms and human rights. And that's a huge problem. Now, there are, of course, efforts to regulate technology from the UN, where essentially we set out a world that's supposed to be governed by international law and human rights in the Charter, in the many different human rights treaties that we have. But also at regional level, for example, the Council of Europe has a convention on the impact of artificial intelligence on democracy and human rights and the rule of law, that Luxembourg and many other countries have signed and that we are implementing, and even at the European Union level. Now, I'm not pretending to be an expert on EU law, but there's about a dozen different recent EU legislations that are specifically supposed to regulate technology and to make sure that it doesn't infringe on people's human rights and freedoms. Oh, sorry. I have to be closer to it. The AI Act, the Cybersecurity Act, Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, and many others. Sometimes they're a little contradictory, but generally they're supposed to protect citizens, residents, consumers of technology, users, as it were. And then there's a whole set of standards, technological standards that the internet is built on, that are also supposed to protect human rights. There's an Internet Engineering Task Force that essentially writes those standards and then debates them, and at the end of the day they're supposed to make sure that the internet remains open, free, interoperable, safe for everyone. Unfortunately, there's also, there's not a lot of profit in regulation, so that's a huge problem. When the internet was built, there was a lot of optimism around it, that it was supposed to make us all free, it was supposed to make information free, make us all work together, end dictatorships, and so on and so forth. But that was replaced by a period of very largely unregulated and unfettered growth, and what I call Silicon Valley ideology, where essentially technology companies with very few restraints on their investments and their work could capture our attention and a large part of our daily lives. Now, in Luxembourg, we're generally very optimistic about technology. We have quite a lot of reflection going on about how technology can improve our lives, how we can have connected cities, how we, what our strategy is for data and artificial intelligence and quantum technology, and I think that's good. I'm a techno optimist myself. But there's also very real human rights harms from technology. I'm not going to make an attempt to even list all of them because there's too many, and I may be running out of time or somebody else's alarm clock is interrupting. But there's, if you looked at the flyer, Agnès Calamar has a quote on there where she cites quite a few of them. Human technology is used in times of conflict, but also for repression during times of peace, to repress human rights defenders and restrict civic space. I've mentioned surveillance capitalism already. It's used by organized crime and by other actors who don't have your best interests at heart. Now, we do a lot of things to try and remediate that, push back against that. For instance, last year, 2 years ago, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross launched an international initiative to revitalize political will for international humanitarian law, and we are working in 7 different work streams, one of which is dedicated to the impact of ICT, information and communication technologies, on armed conflict, specifically on civilians and civilian infrastructure. And before the end of the year, we'll have conclusions out. And Luxembourg is co-chairing that together with Ghana and Mexico and Switzerland. That's why I'm mentioning it. Luxembourg is also a member of the Freedom Online Coalition, which is a group of 41 countries, now that the US under Donald Trump has decided to withdraw. And they are dedicated to defending human rights online and will, for instance, put out a statement very soon on the internet shutdown in Iran. Luxembourg is a member of the Partnership on Information and Democracy. And last year, together with Ukraine, we co-chaired a work stream on information integrity on private messaging platforms. All of you know them and use them, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, and how these can very often be used by bad actors to spread anything from propaganda to malware and what to do against it. And Signal is still very safe, so I still encourage you to use that. And we'll have the conclusions of that out in March. There's also an international process of like-minded states called the Pall Mall process, which is aiming to restrict and regulate spyware. And that was surprisingly launched by the UK and France 2 years ago, and Luxembourg joined that process last year. And it's already come out with a set of recommendations on how to, what states can do to make sure that spyware isn't used in an irresponsible way, they say. If there is a responsible way to use them. And then finally we started a small working group on technology and human rights last year, to complement all the rest of the work that's done here in Luxembourg on digital inclusion and digital rights. And we had 40 people around the table just last December, and that's only the start of it. There's just too much to say and too much to do. Very often it feels like you're trying to drink from a fire hose if you're trying to look at what's going on in the world, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, from the US, in which basically 80 years of democratic progress are being done every day, to places where active genocides are ongoing or are sort of on hold, to conflicts, civil wars. And again, like I said earlier, in all of these, technology plays a very important role. I'm more or less at the end of my prepared remarks, and I promised Salomé I wouldn't go over 10 minutes, so we'd have a bit more time for your questions later. So thanks very much for your attention, and I look forward to the human rights defenders who will speak next and then discussing the vote.
So if I got the message well, I have to speak close. Yeah, okay. Guten Abend, bonsoir, good evening. So I am Dr. Salomé Lannier. I'm a researcher at the University of Luxembourg, and I am very, very happy to moderate this panel tonight with such a diversity of topics that are going to showcase different forms of oppression in civic spaces and against human rights. So we'll start the roundtable with short presentations of our three speakers, who I would like to thank again for their time and their commitment to share their expertise. I'm not going to spoil their topics because they will talk about it way better than I would. I kindly remind our speakers that you have 7 minutes, and Esmeralda will make you a sign when you have 1 minute left. And I will also kindly ask the audience to keep their questions and comments for the second part of the evenings, where we're going to move from presentations to interactive questions and answers. Thank you so much. Taysir, if you want to speak, if you want to start.
Hi everyone, can you hear me well? First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm Taysir Mathlouthi, Senior EU Advocacy Officer at Hamle. Hamle is a Palestinian digital rights organization. We work on advocacy towards the rights of Palestinians in Palestine, Israel, and at the international level as well. I'll be speaking about a very specific and niche topic today, because my expertise is specifically on militarization of AI. What we've seen for the past 3 years almost is a genocidal war that is a precedent when it comes to the use of AI for weaponry and surveillance. The Israeli army and the Israeli government have created a new cyber warfare called the Unit 8200, specialized in how we could maximize military capabilities through AI and through cyber and digitalization. So what has been happening for the past 2 years, around 2024, is that this specific unit has been creating a sort of ChatGPT-like large language model to be able to gather as many data as possible from Palestinians, especially from the occupied territories, and to create an AI agent where the military could ask any question about anyone who's Palestinian. So basically, the idea is that you could go to a checkpoint, to a border crossing, or just be at the airport, and they will ask about you, the AI agent. So basically, they could ask simple questions such as, should I let this person enter the country, or should I arrest this person? And what is happening within the Gaza Strip is that they are using this tool to say, should I kill this person? What has been happening as well is that the dehumanization of Palestinians reached a point where human soldiers don't even verify if they should target those people or not. an AI system is telling them whether or not those people are potential threats or not. And what is important to mention here is that most of those systems are not efficient. What policymakers are telling us, what the Israeli government is telling us, is that thanks to those AI systems, they are killing less people, they are having less collateral damage. What we're seeing through our research is that most of these AI systems are bad, are not efficient at all, and that we're facing around 50% of false positive. When I'm saying 50% is that they are killing 50% of people wrongly. And what is interesting as well is that they are using those tools to kill people, and they are afterward marketing those AI systems as battlefield tested. What's fascinating in a very negative aspect is that multiple and various armies throughout the world are interested in buying those AI systems for their own military goals and for their own wars. We know that the government of Uganda, for example, is very close to the Israeli government and already buying spywares such as Pegasus, but also those AI systems. We know that Israel has been using also those systems and tested them on the Lebanese population. We know that the UK, the French, and the US governments are interested in buying those tools, and we know that the Israeli startups and the private sector working on those systems are most of the time invited to arms firms first towards the world. But what's important to mention as well is that the Israeli army is not only using tools built by the Israeli army. They are buying tools that are coming from the EU. They are buying tools that are coming from the US. And they are storing data illegally gathered from the Palestinian population in data centers that are based within the EU. This is, for example, the case with Microsoft giving access to this specific unit, the 8200 unit, and storing data on Palestinians in the Netherlands and in Ireland. So if the majority of us here are EU citizens, we could definitely work on our own regulations, but also call our policy makers, our politicians, and ask about those specific questions. What's interesting here is that we are today in this Museum of Resistance and Human Rights, and that's also why I don't only want to work on AI systems as being the end of the world war that we know and not having any solutions about it. We do have solutions. We could leverage regulations such as the EU AI Act. We could ask this EU AI Act being implemented right now within the EU to be to delete some specific mentions such as the exceptionality on military use. We could ask as citizens who have rights within the EU to ask for regulation of military use of AI, and we could also ask for more transparency and explicability of those AI tools. It is really important to understand that we do have some power to block the expansion of those tools, and if we do not start today, those specific tools being used on the Gaza population will be used and are already used, to be honest, on EU citizens. We know that the French government, for example, is already using facial recognition by Israeli companies to survey. Sorry, this is my time's up. But basically to survey citizens in France. So we do have ways to leverage. And that's also why I also want to have a conversation with you. I don't want to only talk about the negative and what's happening in this genocidal war, but see what's happening and what has been happening for the past 3-4 years and say, okay, now we need specific repertoires of actions and how we can organize ourselves to say we're against that and we'll fight against those AI systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this first presentation. Tenzin, do you feel like going second?
심지어 당시 대화단 대회 교단된 바주시 심지어 당시 동해는 동해기 규례 제바주시 심지어 당시 동해면 대화단 민대바주시 심지어 당시 예리 차가나 제바 단념된 내바주시. May all sentient beings be full of happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings live in equanimity, free from attachment and hatred. So I wanted to say this little prayer after we were hosted by the director of this museum. When I walked through the halls, it touched me so much, and I thought it was important to say this little Tibetan prayer. So thank you very much for the visit. So tonight I want to speak about a form of repression that might not feel like a repression, living here in Europe, what we call digital repression or the digital authoritarianism. Because unfortunately for Tibetans, it is not a future risk. We are in this reality for Tibetans inside Tibet and Tibetans outside Tibet. Inside Tibet, digital surveillance is woven into every fabric of our lives. People are arrested not only for what they do in public, but for what is found on their phones, for contacting relatives abroad, for sharing religious images, for creating private messaging groups. Since 2021, human rights organizations have documented dozens of cases in which Tibetans were detained for so-called banned contact or for communicating outside China. These cases include long prison sentences and, in at least one documented instance, death in custody after mistreatment. One monk was arrested for creating a WeChat group to celebrate the birthday of an elderly monk. 4 monks were sentenced up to 20 years of prison just for sharing messages outside Tibet. Others have been detained simply for promoting Tibetan language online. What makes this especially dangerous is how normalized it has become inside Tibet. The message here is unmistakable. Using a phone in Tibet is no longer a neutral act. It is a political risk. But unfortunately, this doesn't stop at China's borders. For more than 2 decades, Tibetans in exile have lived under the shadow of China's digital pressure. As soon as our community gained access to global communication tools, those tools were turned against us. As early as 2009, researchers uncovered GhostNet, a large-scale cyber espionage network that compromised computers used by Tibetan's exiled government, Tibet-related organizations around the world, and they use largely through email phishing, etc. Since then, Tibetan groups in exile have repeatedly been targeted through email hacks, malware-laden attachments, and so-called waterhole attacks. These were not isolated incidents, and they were not random cybercrime. They were sustained, politically motivated campaigns aimed at mapping networks, monitoring activism, and extracting sensitive information from an entire community. What made this effective was not technical sophistication, but the digital environment which prioritized connectivity and convenience over security, especially for communities already at risk. When Tibetans warned that user data could be exploited and that free platforms came with political cost, those concerns were often dismissed. Today, fortunately, broader publics begin to question the power and the alignment of these same platforms. And there's one more layer of digital repression that needs to be named here: disinformation. Authoritarian states not only surveil dissent, but they also actively flood the information space to distort it. Disinformation campaigns, bot networks, coordinated online narratives are used to distract, confuse, and exhaust. They create false controversies, deny documented abuses, and frame repression as stability or counter-revolutionary. For targeted communities like us, this works as a form of gaslighting. Survivors and activists are told that their experiences are exaggerated, politicized, or simply untrue. Not just by states who are complicit in it, but by an online environment engineered through bots and coordinated campaigns to manufacture doubt. Disinformation does not just attack truth, it attacks solidarity. It isolates communities, makes allies hesitant, and turns clear cases of repression into endless debates. When people do not know what is true, they stop caring. China's digital repression of Tibetans show us that civic space today is not only attacked through laws, arrest, or physical force, it is engineered through everyday technologies. If digital surveillance can dismantle civic space without bans, without headlines, without visible violence, how do we defend civic space when repression is built into the platforms we rely on? And how do we ensure that Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, activists across the global south are not only cited as case studies, but recognized as early witnesses whose experiences must shape how we respond today? Defending civic space in the 21st century means recognizing surveillance itself as a tool of repression. Defending civil space in the digital age means recognizing that repression operates on two levels, through surveillance that silences and through disinformation that distorts. Together, they make repression quieter, deniable, and easier to sustain. I believe that we need to defend not only the right to speak, but the right to communicate, organize, and be believed and represented, without fear, without manipulation, and without being gaslighted into silence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those very strong last words. Magdalena? Paus.
Good evening. My name is Magdalena. I'm the Policy and Network Coordinator of the EULAT Network, which is a network of more than 40 European organizations working for and with Latin America. I was expecting a bit of a less formal setting, but I'll do my best to fit this setting. My intervention is a bit broader, right, because I'm going to talk a bit about civic space in Latin America more in general, and also other evolving repression, other methods of evolving repression, so not necessarily in the digital sphere. But first, just a reminder, I think it's already clear that the civic space is shrinking worldwide, not only in Latin America, of course, and also here in Europe. It's not bad to remind ourselves that this is also the case here. I work in Brussels and I see this in the European institutions every day, so let's keep that in mind. And it's good to keep in mind also that research indicates that when civic space is repressed and restricted, the general quality of democracy deteriorates, and that threats against human rights defenders have a general chilling effect on civil society and on society as a whole. So what about the civic space in Latin America? There's, of course, a clear trend towards closure. Latin America is both the most unequal region in the world and the most dangerous region for human rights defenders, because maintaining such unjust and unequal social relations has often required the use of force, of state force, against those who protest or resist the status quo. And in Latin America, this is often linked to the dominance of economic elites who contribute to democratic weaknesses and exploit them to promote their own interests.
These actors, together with others, such as criminal groups or conservative elites, form a mutual reinforcing nexus that exacerbate crisis. And of course, now we also see an increasing trend of authoritarianism and populist governments in the region, many of them also endorsed by the current US government. There are many ways of restricting civic space in Latin America. I will focus on maybe in some common strategies we see across the region, some new common strategies. So the first one is the creation of this opposition enemy. So governments smear NGOs, human rights defenders, opposition figures, activists, journalists, accusing them of conspiring with foreign powers or promoting international political agendas or destabilizing the country. And this is also a global narrative, right? It's this anti-UN, anti-gender, anti-human rights, international far-right agenda, so it's no coincidence that it's also pervasive in the region. And there's also a new trend when it comes to legislative initiatives. There are many legislations that threat the formation, funding, and activities of civil society organizations in the region. For instance, there are these foreign agent laws that are expanding and spreading throughout the continent in countries such as El Salvador, Peru, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Paraguay, and Venezuela. And what are these foreign agent laws? Maybe you have heard about them because it's also a global trend. These are a handy tool to discredit civil society activities by equating them with promoting the interests of a foreign power. They're also part of this global trend I was talking about, and the first one actually was created in Russia in 2012, and then expanded to countries such as Georgia, but also Hungary, Bulgaria, so the European Union. And they are conceived particularly to attack civil society, human rights defenders, and especially those who defend gender or human rights or the environment, right? Especially in the region, in Latin America. And behind this transparency narrative, this transparency narrative is instrumentalized to create huge administrative and reporting burden, excessive monitoring and control, excessive penalties such as big fines, loss of funding, or even the cancellation of the legal personality. And then also we see in the region more how these more traditional repressive methods are complemented now by new technological tools, as we were also discussing before. So digital surveillance in general, but also using spyware such as Pegasus in places like Mexico, El Salvador, or Ecuador. I don't know how much time I have left, but I wanted to maybe briefly talk about El Salvador. 3 minutes, okay, I'll try to be brief. So El Salvador, maybe you have heard a lot about this country. A special president, I would say, Bukele, who's well known for his successful, entre guillemets, security policies. But actually in the country what is going on right now is that we have a structured and very deteriorating civic space, democratic dismantling and complete erosion of the rule of law, a huge concentration of power on this president since 2021, and he was unconstitutionally re-elected, and the conditions of the civic space are, of course, very, very dire. A lot of people are in exile right now. So what is happening here is that many methods get combined to repress the civic space in general, but here we see a very strong foreign law legislation, which is actually almost the same as the one in Nicaragua and very similar to the one in Russia. So you see that it's not a matter of political side, it's just populism and authoritarianism legislation. Besides that, there's also many legislative changes that were approved since 2022 that create the potential for illegal surveillance of citizens. And here there was a comprehensive penal code that introduced a section dedicated to legalizing cyber surveillance, enabling cooperation in technological interventions by other states, such as the involvement of federal agencies from the United States or the implementation of the Pegasus software. So this is just one example of what is going on in the region. Of course, it's not the worst, but El Salvador is going towards a very, very dangerous path. Maybe just to end on a positive note, in this very complicated environment, civil society and NGOs and human rights defenders are still resisting and looking for strategies. So from like strategic litigation against this legislation to changing offices to other countries, or even going illegal and keep operating, but also creating international alliances, transnational alliances to exchange on better strategies to face these threats, but also working on counter narratives to actually, to counter the legitimization of the persecution of civil society through these narratives that, as I said, were global. So we believe also that we need to create these counter narratives also in a global and international way. So I'm gonna leave it there. Hope it was not too long, and thank you.
Hi, thanks for calling tech support. I think you should go to lhc.lu, Luxembourg House of Cybersecurity. They have an entire places that you can call, to get tech support. Normally it's very rare for someone to because somebody would need access either to your computer or basically your login details to your webmail. But I mean, let somebody who knows about computers look at it and see if. I mean, sometimes it's just something innocuous happens and we don't find an email. But go to lhc.lu or circle.lu and they'll have solutions.
Anyone had a similar experience?
Maybe it's I don't know which email you're using, which provider, but maybe you have to escalate a complaint to your provider. If it's Gmail, you have to ask Gmail Google, and maybe they had specific internal policies. I don't know if it's due to the language, because hundreds of millions of people speak Russian, and I do think they have access to emails. But I would suggest to call a help desk, and you can do that for free from different digital security and NGOs, and they could look at how to complain directly to the provider. Thank you for your question. Of course, the use of AI tools in the military context dehumanizes the targets, and it's way easier for soldiers to kill. There have been research showing that soldiers think that they are playing video games while killing people. Hence the importance of regulation. I do think that it's going to be very complicated to explain, to debunk the AI hype and this efficient opinion around it, but at the same moment it's really important to educate policymakers, and especially the ones who are working on international law and the Geneva Conventions and how we do war, because something is quite important in the use of AI is the concept of liability. Who's liable when the AI systems are going rogue? And in the specific case of Gaza, but also in other places, we also have to archive what's happening, because at some point we will need to ask questions. Why this AI system said to kill this person who was an innocent person? Who's liable? Who should be judged for that? And I do think that we also need to think and discuss about the current international frameworks we have around the Geneva Conventions, but also international law, and how we add the digital realm and the use of AI in those specific frameworks and conventions, because the way we do war, unfortunately, is changing a lot. And if we do not consider cyber warfare and the use of AI systems, obviously lots of people who should be judged for crimes against humanity and war crimes won't be judged. We are way behind. I mean, people working with the UN will tell you we're behind, but that's also why we need to think a lot around that, and we shouldn't say those regulations, international law, the Geneva Conventions, are frozen texts. No, we should change them, we should rethink them, and just interpret them for the world we're living in now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that, I mean, if you talk about safe channels, organizing and communicating, I don't think that the national, like, at least not a government-controlled national social media would be the answer. Of course not, particularly not in some of the countries that I was discussing. If we're talking about like independent open source, not relying on big tech kind of apps or media, yeah, could be a solution. I do think that in many places, at least in Latin America, there's just a huge lack of or awareness of the risks that you have behind these social media and other platforms. So I was saying before, I've seen many human rights defenders using like WhatsApp to communicate about very sensitive issues, and it's like, please don't do it. So I think that first education and raising awareness, and trying to have trainings on that, and then we could think about other kind of safer platforms. Thank you.
No, this comes up every time, and actually a few months ago we had the Amnesty researcher who wrote the original Pegasus report here in Luxembourg, and we met with a number of NGOs, actually all of the NGOs in the consortium and a few more. Well, she wasn't here to talk about Pegasus, she was here to talk about other digital tools, how to protect civic space online. I mean, it's a known problem. NSO Group is the organization that writes the Pegasus code and sells it around the world. And they have a dependency in Luxembourg called Q-Cyber, and that's mostly used for funneling money from A to B. The former Minister of Foreign Affairs wrote to them when the Amnesty report came out saying, well, this is terrible, you shouldn't be doing this, and they wrote back a boilerplate legalese response saying, oh no, we only sell to law-abiding, human rights-respecting governments, and the software is only used for fighting terrorism and organised crime and other terrible things. And the problem is, since I'm not entirely sure, because I think there's new elements about whether they're actually selling Pegasus from Luxembourg as well. Our state of knowledge back then was that they were only doing financial things here. So we didn't really have tools to, other than saying, okay, we're taking away your license to do business, and then they could have sued us in court for that, and then we would still be in court probably. So beyond the human rights due diligence toolkit, we didn't really have anything to do against them. There is an ongoing court case in, I think, Barcelona at the moment, and the Catalan prosecutor who's prosecuting that case has reached out to Luxembourg, to the Luxembourg judicial authorities. So I'm not, I'm a civil servant. I don't have any privileged information on that. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But the state of play at the moment is still, they're doing financial things here. They don't do production, so we can't refuse, for instance, an export license. We regularly refuse export licenses for weapons that are sent to either conflict zones or countries that commit human rights violations. But the NSO Group specifically found a way around that. But we'll see how the court case goes. I think that's something to watch quite closely. And then on the other hand, I mean, I don't think at all that there's a contradiction in realizing that something is wrong and trying to find ways, find solutions, and participating in the Pole Mall initiative, which is not an organization, it's sort of a multilateral initiative of, at the moment, 22, I think, countries that try to regulate a very difficult to regulate industry. I think that's perfectly legitimate, right? We want to find solutions, you know. So, speak on.
Maybe I'm going to, before we go back to the questions of the audience, to take my privilege as a moderator to say that even financial entities have transparency requirements. We were talking about how transparency requirements can be instrumentalized, but in the EU we also have transparency regulations that apply to financial institutions and that allows us as individuals and as citizens to check where our money goes, what investment funds are, where investment funds are putting their money. And now that I'm talking about the individual, I would like to ask a question to our three panelists. What would you recommend as individual resistance to do or measures to take, for instance, for the persons in this room? Would you have any concrete recommendation?
Hello, thank you for the question. So, within the Tibetan community, especially outside Tibet, outside China, you know, we had a long-term study about, you know, the kind of digital surveillance, the kind of efforts by the Chinese government in some sense, but unfortunately we can never really prove, right, where it is coming from. We can only sort of, you know, it's only a conjecture looking at the act and who might benefit from those acts of like hacking into computers that belong to the Dalai Lama or his office or the Tibetan government in exile. So if you, like, you know, seven years back, so we had this study and we realized that most of the attacks used, you know, email attachments, right? So that's why earlier I was saying these, the methods were not sophisticated, right? It was very simple, sending an email and having a file attached to that email. So in the Tibetan community, we launched a very simple sort of, you know, campaign, which sort of, you know, resonates with the Buddhist philosophy, saying that we should not be attached to, you know, things like. So we said, detached from attachments, you know, and you know it resonates with people because that comes from like a Buddhist philosophy and a Buddhist perspective, and I think that's what we have to do. Like each individual, we have like our own way of doing things according to this community, according to the society, because inside Tibet we don't have that personally, because inside Tibet, especially today, right? When the Chinese government can give orders about what application can or cannot be on like Apple Market, you know, Apple apps or, you know, Google Market, you know, they can just remove all these applications, and Tibetans are sort of, you know, left with nothing but, for example, Tibetans use WeChat, not because they like WeChat, because there's no other, you know, alternative to communicate. And you know, today what is happening inside Tibet is Chinese government is forcing every Tibetan with a smartphone to, you know, install what they call an anti-fraud application. But these applications are used to, you know, survey, you know, used to track people, and used to, like, you know, our telephones have become a source of, you know, control and a source of repression inside Tibet, unfortunately. But you know, Tibetans, we are not just like, you know, passive sort of, you know, actor-led. Tibetans have created like, you know, messaging applications that only Tibetans know. Like, you know, we send links to each other. We download those messaging applications. You know, a few years back, like now it's not available. A few years back, we created what we call Yak Talk. Yak is a Tibetan animals, so yak talk, So we used to use that kind of application to communicate with each other. But today it has become much more complicated. Tibetans inside Tibet, they're just, even if there's no content that is sort of, dangerous in some sense, just the fact that Tibetans have contacts outside Tibet, could lead to imprisonment. So at the moment we don't have much of a choice, with regard to communication.
Be very pragmatic and very concrete, but I do think that the first thing we should do is around AI literacy and digital literacy in general, and how we should fund more and more projects and education around that. It's necessary, because what we're seeing now, so I've been talking more about weaponization of AI, but a topic I'm also working on is around disinformation, information integrity and manipulation of information. And what we have to understand is that even experts like me and others who work every day on AI disinformation, we fall in the trap of AI-generated content, especially in conflict-affected settings. And in June 2025, during the 12 days Iran-Israel war, we've seen thousands of AI-generated content, and especially content around strikes targeting the city of Haifa in the north of Israel. And all this content was fake and was AI-generated, and lots of human rights defenders and journalists believed it. And the worst is that even when we escalated the complaints to the social media platforms, Meta specifically, I will name them, simply said that according to them it isn't against their mis and disinformation policy. So they've allowed this AI-generated content in their platforms just because they were profiting out of it. They were making money out of it. And so I think, yes, first, AI and digital literacy, very important. And second, know your rights. You do have rights as users of those social media platforms, especially within the EU and with this new regulation, the Digital Services Act. And you have ways to ask for your rights and to complain when you're against a decision that has been made on those platforms. So when you see AI-generated content that is most of the time very harmful towards multiple minorities, toward the youth, etc., you have ways and avenues to complain against it and to ask for your rights. And the very interesting aspect of the Digital Services Act is that if social media platforms don't comply with the decision made by the Commission, they have to be highly fined. So we also touch them in their pocket with their money, and the more we use the Digital Services Act, the more we use the avenues we have, the more we can also kind of oblige those platforms to regulate themselves and to follow human rights and fundamental rights. Thank you.
So my advice is not related to the digital sphere, because again that's not my domain of expertise, but I want to go back to what I was saying in the presentation regarding what is happening in Europe. I mean, shrinking civic space is not only that it's happening in faraway countries. It's happening here, and I'm not a European. I was not born here, but I've been living here for 7 years now, 8 years almost, and I've seen it. And authoritarian trends are here. It's not something that is coming. They are here. Anti-foreign laws are being proposed in Europe. Yes, you can say Hungary, Bulgaria, that's not us, right? But also France has proposed one. Yes, it's less dangerous, for sure. But there's a trend there. Police repression. Look at Germany, France, and Belgium, what is happening with Palestinian protests. I mean, these trends are here. Far-right narrative are permeating more moderate discourses and political groups. And this is affecting maybe the most marginalized of our societies first, but it could affect others soon. Look at the US. I mean, yeah, maybe my call for individual resistance, which I don't really believe in, but okay. Yeah, resist the mainstream narrative, consume more independent media, go protest, go vote well, and don't take your rights for granted, because maybe that's how it has been in Europe for a long time, but if you look at the world, it's not how it usually is, so yeah, that would be my call.
Thank you so much for this reminder that even European, even Luxembourg country is facing these shrinking spaces.
Of course, the European Union has obligations under different laws, such as the international law, international human rights law, to uphold fundamental rights and human rights. So the fact that the European Union didn't really take a stance on the war on Gaza is already against its own obligations. So of course we do have ways to leverage the power that some external countries have on the EU, but then we're going back to what you were saying around those fascists and far-right trends that are also taking the EU. And I think that we have to look at it at the international level, and we have to take into account the geopolitical context where the ideology of techno-fascism is taking so much power right now, and even the EU, who's selling itself as being the one protecting fundamental rights, is also falling into the trap of innovation, of tech for just being the super power of the world. And basically the EU is following trends that we see within the US, in China, Russia, etc. So we do have power, but our power is shrinking. Unfortunately, I don't have any positive answer. It's quite difficult to fight, I would say, within the EU Parliament and to have conversations with the Commission, but we shouldn't stop, and that's the only answer I have for the moment. But,
thank you, Taysir.
Sorry, I switched. Thank you, Taysir. Well, we have all the answers. There's a human rights answer to every problem that we have. But human rights is grounded in law, in international law, and politics is, well, politics. And the problem is that politicians will always make exceptions. Well, yes, human rights violations are bad, but those human rights violations in that country, well, those are our friends. We can't really do anything against our friends. And that's the huge, that is the fundamental lesson of the 20th century, of the Holocaust, of the Second World War, that has not been learned, or that has been very actively unlearned, that law should always triumph over politics. International law, well, there's bad law, of course, as well. I mean, yes, the Holocaust was legal, and enslavement of millions of people were legal back in the 18th century. But international human rights law should always triumph over short-sighted national economic political interests and whatever, except in reality they don't. And the problem is that there is this collective insanity among people once they reach a certain level of power, where they decide that they can make an exception for themselves and their friends. And those exceptions are never grounded in human rights law, they're never grounded in constitutional law, they're always politics. Right? So unless we snap out of that, there is no magic wand for that. What you can do is, well, when you vote, don't vote for the far right. I was going to say a swear word, but we're still on camera. But also don't reward centrist parties that basically shift their policies to the far right because they try to attract more voters. I think there's a lot of, there is also, I have an entire page here. You have to take the microphone away from me, Salomé. But yes, I'll get to the point. I mean, something I take from Taysir's and Tenzin's and Magdalena's presentations is this is a universal problem. There is an enormous amount of coordination between authoritarian regimes, but also in the grey area between countries that call themselves democratic and authoritarian regimes. And the problem is that we want, as long as we keep making exceptions for our friends and don't fully apply international human rights law, well, these problems will continue to exist. They always have an economic dimension as well. Magdalena mentioned the incredibly important pertinence of how much of this is driven by economic elites. We talked quite a bit about the US and about the billionaires of Silicon Valley and elsewhere that are now rolling back democracy, but also their friends in countries like Argentina or now recently Chile that look back on very long histories of repression of, in fact, the first so-called neoliberal coup d'etat was in 1973 in Chile, supported by the CIA, but it brought to power people who are now back in power there. And those kinds of things, I mean, they have international ramifications as well, of course. And then the technological level cooperation, we talked about NSO Group quite a lot. Practically every European military and many intelligence services buy software from Palantir, which is another American company, very close to the Trump regime again. So all of those kind of things are very important as well. And I think there's one thing, and I'll finish with that, sorry, that you always need to guard against. It's not your individual responsibility to solve all of these problems. Yes, there's a lot of things you can do. You can vote, you can practice digital hygiene and digital literacy and use software that's free and open instead of proprietary. But these are the responsibilities of government. And yes, of course, you can influence your government by writing to your member of parliament and writing the letter to the editor. But at the end of the day, this is a political responsibility. It's one of the great successes of neoliberalism I think is sort of to put the responsibility for all the things that are wrong on the individual people's shoulders, and that destroys your mental health, but it doesn't solve the climate crisis, or it doesn't solve fundamental inequalities or genocides and crimes against humanity and these kind of things. Sorry, Salomé, it was too long.
Yeah, I can quickly respond. So AI is exacerbating inequalities in all aspects of our lives, not only human rights in Palestine or in other places of the world. We have to take into account that AI isn't something that is in the air. We're talking about systems, about cables, about data centers. And when we talk about inequalities around AI, we first have to talk about the fact that we are building AI specialized data centers in huge deserts in the world, taking the water of the communities living in those places. It's a huge negative effect on the environment. That's first. Then, as an example, NVIDIA, the biggest company for microchips in the US, is building the biggest AI specialized data center in the Middle East, in the north of Israel, and they're also taking some of the West Bank with it. So this is crazy. Like, if you're looking for a job in an AI specialized data center, all the job market is focused on Israel right now. So if you are like a software engineer or whatever you want to be in a data center, you have work if you want in Israel. If you want to work in Israel and with NVIDIA. So this is second. And then we have to talk about coding and algorithms and how they are being created. AI isn't neutral because the ones who are building this technology are not neutral people. They have political opinions, they have ways of thinking, and they have embedded discrimination as well. So obviously, if those systems are being built by people in the Silicon Valley who have far-right opinions, you will see those far-right opinions within and embedded in those algorithms and codes. And hence the importance of data sovereignty. I'm not here to say we should own our own data centers because I don't think it's the solution, but I do think that people from global majority countries should own their own data centers, should own their own data, and should be able to know where their data data is being stored, and who's handling their data centers being built in their own lands and countries. So inequalities, because of AI, will only exacerbate, and I don't think we should talk about AI as only an innovative system that will save our lives and enhance our work. What we are saying now is that it has a huge negative impact on the labor market and on many different systems and parts of our lives. So we have to be very critical about it. I'm not saying we shouldn't use it and it won't be part of our life. It is already part of our lives. We should be critical the way we're using it, and it shouldn't be replacing the way we're living. It shouldn't take so much part and space in our lives. Yeah, that's all.
So even though everyone here is working with research, I guess the research is me. So first I would like to add that we also see labor inequalities when it comes to AI. Most people think that AI is just created out of the blue. One amazing engineer coded something and then, oh, poof, we have ChatGPT. No, all of this data is actually being trained and retrained by people. And these people are mostly in the global south, very badly remunerated, and actually see very hardcore content. When you go on Facebook, when you go on Instagram, and you don't see child sexual abuse, when you don't see all the sexual assault and rape that is being done in war battlefields, it's because human moderators are checking this content. And these moderators are very poorly paid, receive no psychological help, and are mostly located in the global south. So this being said, we are indeed facing a very complex moment at the university at the moment, with all of our students and ourselves including using different forms of large language models. We don't have a magic solution for now, but we are, at least in the Bachelor of Law, we give them 1 week, I think, at the very start of their studies to teach them methodology. And now we put a very big emphasis on AI. What can the AI do, and what can the AI kind of do? And how to check if it's hallucinating. And also recognizing that the most you use large language models, the less you get to learn how you do research yourself, how you get to learn how to learn. So we are still in the process of discussing this topic and trying to, we're not going to solve it, but find some solutions and training in digital literacy. But that's unfortunately still ongoing.
Thanks very much. Wow, you really opened a can of worms there. I mean, you mentioned Tigray as well, and Ethiopia, and we haven't even talked about that. I mean, it is perhaps the conflict that killed the most people at the beginning of this century, and there's been a lot of them already in Syria and in Sudan, and Taysir talked a lot about the genocide in Gaza. But there was a genocide in Tigray as well. There was a genocide in Myanmar against the Rohingya that was supported by Facebook, essentially. And yes, there are UN inquiries on all of these, and if anybody wants to find them, I can point you to the right website. And there's so many examples. I very prudently said there's 130 conflicts around the world at the moment, and all of them have a technological dimension. I think we could delve into much more detail on all of them. Salomé and Taysir mentioned some of the risks. The problem of the EU AI Act is that it's risk-based, which is not bad, but it doesn't look at all the right risks. It doesn't look at all the harms that AI systems do. You mentioned labor rights, you mentioned discrimination, the inbuilt discrimination, you mentioned the environmental impact already. There's a huge cognitive risk to people, especially children and young people who use these systems, but chatbots are classified as low risk in the EU AI Act. So in many ways, there are real harms happening now that are not properly captured by the EU AI Act. There's also two dimensions we talk a lot about, but that are not in the AI Act, and that's the economic risk. The fact that, well, some of you mentioned it already, that there's a massive economic bubble that's about to burst, probably, and where, again, probably the poorest will be hit the hardest. And then there's the political risk as well, of
how much AI has rotted a lot of people's brains. I mean, the so-called, and it's cynical to call it that, but Department of Governmental Efficiency in the US, which has ended up costing tens of thousands of people their jobs who were working in probably the most useful professions in the US, and they've been fired by people who know nothing except a little bit about technology. And that's what happens when you put people in charge who believe that AI can solve all of the problems, and they have no idea what social security and what social services and public services are actually for. So those risks are not really covered by the EU AI Act, and that's also why it's probably not a very good law to replicate elsewhere in the world.
Facial recognition is unconstitutional and illegal. So when countries are using it, they are bypassing the law. That's the case in France, where they are using specific national security and état d'urgence, so like state of urgency, to use those specific facial recognition tools, but they are not supposed to use them. It's unconstitutional. And biometrics data, so basically your face, the way you look, etc., are the most sensitive data, and we should protect them as much as possible. So when France is using facial recognition for policing, what they say is that they will only use it for specific people or for preemptive and predictive ways of like looking at potential terrorist threats or people who might hurt the society and so on. But so that's, I would say that those are the things we should say to our governments when it comes to facial recognition, and various NGOs are starting lawsuits against their own governments. NGOs are having numerous strategic litigation actions against their own countries and governments. That's the case in France of La Quadrature du Net, which is the biggest digital rights organization in France. So on your second point around the digital wallet, I'll be just very quick, but also various NGOs, and you should look at what EDRI is doing, the European Digital Rights Network, around the digital wallet and how dangerous it can be for EU citizens and residents. So I'm not an expert on the topic of the digital wallet, but what I know about it is that digital rights organizations within the EU are strongly against it, and it's very dangerous under the GDPR, but also under other regulations. And centralizing data is never a good idea, never.
Yeah, I mean, I think another point to make is that technologically independent, and that is that technological gimmicks lead to bad governance and bad policing. If you give police some possibility to surveil everybody, they will become very lazy and they will have a lot of false positives, and they won't be doing their job as well as they would otherwise. And I think a lot of law enforcement people will tell you exactly that they're very, very critical and very suspicious. But unfortunately, well, a lot of cops are bastards and will use those tools also to spy on people they shouldn't be spying on. On the digital wallet, I think it's an argument for making sure that digital public infrastructure is strong and is from the ground up built with human rights in mind. And we've adopted, the Freedom Online Coalition has adopted basically a set of principles on human rights respecting digital public infrastructure, which we've supported in Luxembourg as well. So I think it's not a good idea to distrust all technology and to distrust your government in everything it does, because it does a lot of good things as well, like vaccinate people and build schools and hospitals. But it's always good to insist on the human rights, on the respect of the human rights elements in all of that. And I think there's more questions.
I'll just maybe add quickly so not the digital wallet, because I don't know the topic, but we have also a very strong case law of the ECG, which is sitting in Luxembourg. and we really need to separate each step of the processing of the data, and we have very strong recommendations of the ECG, notably thanks to La Quadrature du Net, on the retention first of the data, then the access to the data, who can access, and then the sharing of the data. Because according to the European Court of Human Rights, this is where we have most likely violations of human rights, because we share data too much. So hopefully we can get some more restrictions and guidelines in the foreseeable future.
Thanks very much. Now it's, I mean, what to say really? It's a problem of how the export control system works. When you buy a weapon, you have to write who the end user is going to be. And when the UAE buys weapons from, the case you mentioned, Greece, they'll put, well, we'll use this and we'll use it in good faith. And then the exporting countries puts their stamp on to say, oh yes, well, that's fine. So I think what countries that do export weapons and also digital technologies that can be used for repression need to do is apply human rights due diligence. Say not just, well, yes, it says UAE uses this and we are pretty much, although they are very repressive at home as well, even if you were all right with them, you'd still have to say, well, there is documented evidence by the fact-finding mission of the Human Rights Council on the situation in Sudan and by a lot of independent NGOs who have no interest other than uncovering the truth about human rights, that the UAE exports these weapons to a genocidal militia in Sudan that use it to destroy the city of Al-Fasher and actually commit a lot of other awful crimes against humanity. That should actually be the way it works, right? That should say, well, no, we have a track record of the indicated end user not being the actual end user, and then we don't export. So that's the way out. But the problem is that decision always lies with every individual country that is either an exporting or a transit state for these kinds of technologies. But there are solutions, and I think again it's important to put pressure on. On politics and keep it in the public space. And again, this has the link between UAE and RSF has been documented many times over, but still, again, there's so many things going on that people get distracted and then forget about it again, and that's terrible.
Yeah, I just want to add something on the due diligence you were mentioning. So thank you for bringing the Sudan case here. But going back to the EU and the EU regulations, maybe you know that there was this due diligence directive, right, that was approved at the European level, where all the countries in the European Union were supposed to be obliged to implement this in their national legislation, and this would oblige big companies, mainly transnational companies, to actually implement due diligence throughout all their chain of activities, upstream, downstream. It was not a perfect directive, not at all, but it was better than nothing, of course. But now this directive was completely watered down by this new push from the European Union on simplification, they call it, but it's actually like completely dysregulating everything that might affect big companies. So I think it's a shame, and it's not only happening with this due diligence directive, but also they have how many, like 8 omnibus packages, they call them like that. There's also one in the digital regulations, so all these regulations we have been discussing now might also get watered down or even completely deleted, erased. So yeah, that's what's going on, and it's being shown also what's behind this big simplification push is big companies from the US, not only, but a lot of them from the US, big tech companies from the US. So that's how the European Union is being influenced, and that's why I was talking about like these trends are in the European Union right now, and they're being like permeating all the, I don't know if you say like that, but how you understand all the also moderate forces. So just want to bring that to the discussion. Thank you.
And that's why we need to listen to the persons who are the first affected by surveillance and monitoring, and then make sure that these tools, we mentioned the DSA, we just mentioned the Judicial Directive, are being used by NGOs to show that there are violations. So even if they are watered down, there are also some national alternatives, and that's where we see the importance of taking them into action.
I can speak as a technical person here, but on your last point, please come to me after, because we do work on those cases of people just advocating for Palestine, which is fundamental rights to be able to go to demonstrate, etc. We are collecting cases right now to be able to either use the DSA, the Digital Services Act, to escalate complaints to social media platforms such as Instagram, but we are also starting strategic litigation actions, because those social media platforms simply don't have the right to censor you. And I think that, so if you have cases like that, please bring them to us, because we're also trying to evaluate whether censorship cases are decided only by the platforms or also collaborating with the different governments. So